for joining me as we spend the next 5 weeks looking at the sometimes of our lives. But before we get started, I feel like I need to take just a minute to introduce myself for those of you who don't know me. As you know, my name is Lori. I am married to an amazing guy for over 20 years, and I'm not just saying that because he happens to be on the other side of the camera. In fact, none of these videos would have happened without him. Currently, we have a son that's a freshman in high school and a daughter that's a freshman in college. And you will learn quite a bit about them over the next few weeks, as a lot of my stories, of course, involve them. I've been a special education teacher, a preschool teacher, and a children's pastor. I've worked full-time, part-time, and only at home. I know what it's like to be up late, so tired at the end of a long day trying to do Bible study, and what it's like to get up early in the morning praying that you get some of it done before anyone wakes up. I've also carried it in my purse so that when I'm stuck waiting in a school parking lot, I can get at least one more page done that day. I know the commitment that it takes to do a Bible study, and I'm so honored that you are going to walk through this, spend time on this with me and hopefully some of your friends. When my husband Darren and I were first married, he worked on the campus of Wabash College, which happens to be a beautiful campus filled with many old brick buildings. There was one particular building that they were renovating, and he wanted to take me by and take me in and show me what they were doing. When we got to the building, we walked up the stairs to the second floor, and he showed me around and showed me all the things they were doing and what he was excited that they were renovating. And then when we went to leave, something happened. Instead of walking back down the stairs like we'd come up, he took me to a window, and said, "All right, this is how we have to leave." To this day, I don't know why that's how we had to leave, but it is. Now, what you have to know about me, and probably after this moment, he finally really got it, I am petrified of heights. I do not like them in any way, shape, and form. I do not like heights. So as I stood there at the window, he just took a step out onto the scaffolding like it was no big deal. But I'd like to point out that I do not have a very wide leg span, especially compared to my 6-foot tall husband. So I stood there and began to freeze. As my husband tells the story, he could see by the look in my eyes that he had about 5 seconds to get me out of that window and onto the scaffolding. So he reached out his hand, and as I took it, he pulled me across onto the scaffolding. I realized that is sometimes how my life with God is. That I'm here, but God is calling me to be over there, and I believe that's where the sometimes moments happen in life. And while thankfully God is a lot more secure than scaffolding, He is our scaffolding. He will be there to get us from where we are to where He wants us to be. So before we spend weeks talking about the sometimes of our lives, I think it's important that we take just a couple minutes and look at the constants of God, because we know that God is Alpha, Omega, beginning and end, and there are things about Him that will never ever change. The first one is that God always provides. He always provides for us, but we're going to look at that sometimes that provision comes in what is left. We also know that God always wants us in His Word. Daily, as much as we can, memorizing it and studying it. But sometimes we have to get out of the Bible and out of His Word and go out and live it. Our next one is that God is always with us. We know that. The Bible tells us that He will never leave us. But sometimes we find that those challenging times don't fade quickly. We are stuck in them for a while. And that is where we look at sometimes in order to be with God, we have to endure. And our last constant is that God always has a plan. He knows even when we don't. He knows the path He wants us on. But sometimes when we try to make our own plan B, it shows that we're not trusting His plan. And we have to learn to step back, get rid of our own plans, and just focus on wholly trusting Him. As we begin to look at our first week, we're going to look at what it means when sometimes we have to give up our plan B. I want to go to Psalm 45 in the NLT Bible, and it says this: "O Lord my God, you have performed many wonders for us. Your plans for us are too numerous to list. You have no equal. If I tried to recite all your wonderful deeds, I would never come to the end of them. The MacArthur Study Bible categorizes verses 4 and 5 as the multiple resources. In other words, there's so many of them, we cannot count them all. This week, we will look at what it means when we have a plan B. We're going to remember and take time to count all the ways that God has blessed us, even though we know there are so many, we cannot recount them all. So Darren and I have two super great friends, John and Jamie. In fact, this is the couple that we met through. And it just so happens that this story occurred the weekend that we met and started dating. So we were at Darren's parents' house, which sits on the edge of State Forest, and we decided to go canoeing. Now, Darren's family has a game that they always play, sort of a tradition when they're in the canoes, with lemons. And they cut the lemons in half, and they use the lemon halves and the oars to play a game. And there's different points if you get a lemon in the canoe, if you deflect a lemon out of your canoe, and it's super fun and entertaining as you go down the river. Now, what my husband knows, because he grew up on that river, is where the river's deep and where the river is shallow enough that he can jump out of the canoe and retrieve a lemon that was deflected or just missed the canoe altogether. So as we canoed down the river, John has been watching Darren at times just jump out of the canoe, run across, grab the lemon, and get back in the canoe. So after watching this all day, he clearly assumed, okay, I can do this too. So at one point, we threw a lemon, it missed their canoe and landed in the water. And instantly, John hiked up his leg over the canoe to get out and go retrieve it. Unfortunately, he realized there was no ground for him to step on. The water was way too deep. And for some reason, instead of clamoring to get back in the canoe, he just sort of went with it. And Jamie, who was also in the canoe, took her oar, laid it in her lap, accepted her fate, and Darren and I heard her say, "Oh, John," as the canoe tipped. Now, it seemed like slow motion at the time, and they both just let it go and rode with it. Now, that story is a pretty famous one in our family. Even though it happened before we were even married, our children know it, our nieces and nephews know it, even children that I've taught with at church, they know that story. And their favorite part is when we get to the end and Jamie says, "Oh, John." They love to hear that, and they cackle when I say that part. When I think about how Jamie reacted to the situation, she didn't reach out and try to get John back in. She didn't try to fight it and stay in the canoe herself. She simply laid the oar in her lap and went with it. I often wonder, how much easier would my life be if I would stop paddling, put the oar in my lap, and let God steer my canoe, even if sometimes he does tip it? Because even when the canoe is tipped, I can remember all the things that God has done for me. And that is when I remember to trust him. As we look at giving up our plan Bs this week, I hope you have that visual in your mind of what it means to take the oar, put it in your lap, and just ride it out. So as we come to the end of our very first video together, I wanted to share with you why we're gathered here for prayer. When I think about my relationship between me and God and what prayer means, I think of sitting in my backyard with a fire, hanging out with friends or family or maybe our son's youth group. And that's truly what prayer is with God. It's a time to sit down and hang out with him, share your thoughts from the day, get to know him better. That's why at the end of each week, this is where we are going to gather for prayer. You can listen to my words and follow along with me, or feel free to let your thoughts wander and have your own moment and time with God, to reflect on your day, to reflect on the week, to offer up to him any thoughts, concerns, burdens, and prayers that you have for him. So let's take a moment and go to God in prayer. Heavenly Father, we are so excited and honored to spend the next 5 weeks with each other and in your word and with you. God, today I just pray that we can remember this week all of the ways that you are constant. And God, when it seems like our life is changing or that we are struggling to trust you, that we can be mindful that you are constant. You are in all ways in our life. God, I pray that no matter what's happening in each of our lives, to everyone that's out there on the other side of this camera right now, that this week as we look at trusting you, reveal to each of us the areas in our life where we need to fully trust you. We need to let go of plan B. God, for some people, this is a first study, or maybe it's the 10th study, but it's a time in our lives where doing a Bible study and sharing our life every week with others is hard and it's challenging. God, I just pray your presence, that we would feel it, that we would know you are there every time we sit down, we open this book, we dive into your word, or we gather together to share our lives. In your name, in your precious name we pray. Amen.